Welcome to Martial Secrets, where we seek out the most interesting and skilled martial artists to share their insights and years of training with you, the listener. I'm your host, Kris Wilder, and on this broadcast, martial artist Todd Durgan. Todd Durgan is a practitioner of Grandmaster Edmund Parker's Kempo Karate, and has studied the art for some 30 years, and has been involved in martial arts for 30 years and has studied for 22 years in the Kempo Karate system. He's the head instructor of the Tiger and Dragon School in Bonnie Lake, Washington. Mr. Durgan, welcome to Martial Secrets.
Thank you very much, Kris.
And how has your day been so far? Lazy or busy?
Oh, no. My daughter and myself just finished up our horse lessons. Actually, we ride every Sunday morning.
Oh, fantastic. That's great.
I get a true feeling of what a horse stance is.
Oh, that's good. What pushed you into the study of martial arts? What's your story there? Everybody has a moment where it was ignited for them. Where was the flame lit for you?
Mine was actually, since I'm old enough to have grown up during the Bruce Lee on TV era, mine is actually, believe it or not, largely due to the Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris era of being on TV and in the movies. That, coupled with the fact that I had six brothers, two sisters, and I was a very small child until I was in my late teens. But I would have to say, for the most part, it was my fascination with the speed and agility of Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris on TV, watching the advertisements for movies and the shows, the Green Hornet and such.
Kempo wasn't your first art. What did you start with?
Well, actually, I'm not sure what my first art was. I was young enough that I don't remember. I only fondly remember the instructor wearing black. I remember some of the sets and stuff that we learned during the class, and some of the routines and drills that we went through. I remember my first real sparring session with a much older kid who told me he was going to beat the crap out of me, and I actually was able to knock him out. So that was my first experience sparring with anybody. But I really honestly don't know what style it was.
Well, and then you went into Kempo. Tell us about that experience and give us a background for some listeners that might not be really aware of what Ed Parker's Kempo Karate is.
Well, Ed Parker actually studied with William Chow, which was more of a hard-line, hard-style karate. But there was a lot of jiu-jitsu mixed in with the system that he studied. As for me, I started my Kempo studies officially in 1985, I want to say, with a gentleman named Randy Borden, who's since passed. But he was directly related to Ed Parker. He was a nephew, I believe. And if you saw a picture of the two side by side, you would almost not know the difference between them. So it was kind of unmistakably, true that he was related to Ed Parker. So because of that, he was also a big man, and I got to experience what I believe is closely, anyway, similar motion to probably what Ed Parker would have done, although I never got to study with Mr. Parker.
Kempo's known for a lot of stomping, slapping, and to this day it remains misunderstood. What's the value of it? What's the effect on the body of the technique? Walk us through that.
Well, surprisingly, it's also even still misunderstood by a lot of Kempoists. Dr. Ron Chappelle is famous for being on the internet speaking of some of the techniques and some of the things that a lot of currently younger Kempoists don't understand about it. But in reality, what it does, in actuality, is the slapping, a lot of slapping is actually rebounding. And what it's doing is it's creating, if you will, an opposing force, for one, so that as I have one weapon going out, I have another one retracting. So I'm actually pulling. And rather than stopping that pulling hand, I can just bounce it off of my body, thereby accelerating it, redirecting and accelerating it back out into my opponent for an additional strike. So it creates the slap, which we can call a slap check or a rebound, or we can even also call it a positional alignment mechanism or a body alignment mechanism, which is actually some of Dr. Chappelle's sub-level 4 terminology.
So what you've got here in Kenpo then is actually a library of terms that are specific to the art or the industry, in the same way that a doctor or a crane operator or a longshoreman or an ophthalmologist has specific terms to which they can use to communicate with people in their industry. You have the same.
Correct. Yeah, it has been for hundreds of years that I'm sure that you yourself have set foot into traditional schools early on in your career, and where you go in and you're told to stand in a horse stance and throw this punch, and it may be 4 months later before they ever teach you anything else. And if you have a question of what that is, why is that, oftentimes in the old school traditional systems, they would, your place was not to question what it was, but to do it, and to do as you're instructed. Whereas one of the things that Ed Parker brought about through his career and through the coming up in American Kempo was the idea that we can better understand or better execute the principles and concepts of motion, and better execute motion more effectively if we understand what these principles and concepts are and how they apply.
One of those is called, and correct me if I've got this wrong, but I think it's called assumption of failure. And in conjunction with that, Kempo's often accused of being overkill. Walk us through that. Build that bridge so that the listeners and myself can understand what's happening with this, a moniker of overkill and the assumption of failure, and if those two are even related.
Yeah, certainly they are. An assumption of failure ultimately says that we understand that the possibility of a failure that failure is a possibility through our sequence of self-defense motion. Okay, so if I'm executing a technique, let's say I'm, for some of the traditional stylists, they would call it a bunkai out of a form or set, out of a kata. Let's say that I have an opponent, and I have the bunkai is against a right punch, and I'm going to do an inward block, and then I'm going to do a front kick, or I'm going to do an outward hand sword, or I'm going to do a combination there over a sequence. The assumption of failure says that during that process, during that sequence of motion, we have the potential for failure. We have the potential for our opponent throwing an additional punch, throwing an additional strike, maybe grabbing, whatever the case may be. In the Kempo system, Mr. Parker used to refer to it as being over-skilled, not overkill, i.e., and it's funny because people used to say he was paranoid. And actually, people have accused me of being paranoid. But rather than being paranoid, I'm prepared, which led to another one of Mr. Parker's famous quotes, which was better over-prepared, not paranoid. So it ultimately, an assumption of failure ultimately says that yes, we can fail, and in the Kempo system, we want to be prepared for those failures. So we have additional or follow-up movements in a sequence. So every sequence of motion has an additional follow-up or preparatory precaution built into the sequence, so that failure is not so imminent, or is not so, there's less of a possibility of failure.
One of the things that I found fascinating about Kenpo is the terminology that's used in determining methods of movement, and I'm talking specifically about prescribed things such as snapping twigs, 5 swords, scraping hoof, and I thought it was just very, very clever to say, 5 swords. Now I know that I'm going to use 5 shutos in the Japanese language, or sword hands, I'm going to use my hands 5 times, or scraping hoof. Well, what's a hoof? It's a foot. What's it doing? It's scraping.
Right.
I get it. I thought that was just simply brilliant.